Hello everyone, welcome back to City Skylines to this new episode from the Altengrad city. So last time we finished the cargo harbor on the edge of the city. We added more industry here and also completed the train station in the town. Today we will return to the opposite side of the city where we built the hospital complex with lots of those city blocks and the railway trench some time ago. We will continue right here today by expanding the city blocks, but most importantly, we will build the city's first proper tram depot, so let's go. But just because it's going to be the first depot that we are placing in Altengrad in these episodes, it doesn't mean it's going to be the oldest one in the city. I'm most probably going to build some more depots as we progress further, but this one is actually going to be the most recently built because I'm using a building from real life. This is the Tram Depot from Dresden, from Germany, and in real life it was also built in the 1930s, so it perfectly fits the style and the time period that we have right now in the city. As you can see, it's a very nice looking depot building. It has this like a block of maybe residential or office buildings in the front, and behind that it has those workshops or just the halls for the trams. It also has that very nice front of that bigger hall, so it's just a nice looking building. I was really trying to put it somewhere in the city in the previous episodes, but I was kind of always pushing the idea of a tram depot further and further away from the center of the city, which is probably a good idea. You don't really want to have it right in the downtown, and we are not really in the downtown anymore, so this place was pretty much perfect. In the last episode in this part of the city with the hospital complex, I did a lot of those just blocks, some random city blocks, and I definitely felt like I needed to end it at some point, and the Tram Depot project seemed like a very good opportunity to do so, because I would really need to have some kind of an edge to those blocks, some kind of like a gradual transition towards more low density areas or something like that, but some kind of industrial project like the Tram Depot, for example, felt like a nice opportunity to just end those blocks. And behind this Tram Depot, we're just going to do something slightly different in the coming episodes. Anyway, what's exactly happening in here? What am I building? So I placed the Tram Depot right by this street, which I had to slightly alter. This street was already here. If you've been watching the Altengrad live stream, then you could have seen that I built this street to just go underneath the tracks, the railway bridges, and continue into some area that I already mentioned, where I want to have some kind of industrial space, right? Which is going to be in the next episode anyway. So this is quite a busy street. It's not exactly going to be built using the wide avenue, because I kind of want to keep some space for future changes of this part, but that's not really relevant right now. Anyway, I had to use the node controller because for this episode I already had the node controller, so I was definitely using that a lot at the entrance towards the depot, because we need to have some kind of a nicer intersection with all the tracks. I also decided to put like a small loop, like an end station for the trams in here, so that, for example, trams don't need to necessarily go into the depot if they are just going to turn around and continue on the line. It's obviously going to also serve as a passenger stop, because this might have actually been first constructed as like a terminus station, and later in just a couple of years later, after this depot was built, it was extended. The tracks were extended into the industrial area that I mentioned we're going to build past the depot, right? Or maybe the turnaround was just built there for some emergency situations or whatever. Right now in Altengrad, I am actually going to have it as a functioning stop, because it's just going to look much better. This thing that I'm doing in here, this is kind of something that I made up. I haven't really seen it in any of these depots that I was taking inspiration from, obviously the Dresden one, but I figured that there must have been a way to transport the new tram cars into the depots, right, back in the day, in the 1930s. Now, I have seen I have seen the recently made, like in 2020 or something. Well, not really this year, but in some past years, I have definitely seen some trams being transported from factories on trucks. Right? They just pick like a very long trailer with rails, and there are just some special loading platforms in the factories, and they are going to load the tram in there, and the tram can be exported into thousands of kilometers away. But back in the day, I don't think that they did it this way. So, like I said, I'm not exactly sure if this is realistic or not, but I kind of tried to just build it so it would seem like it is. So this is basically a railway connection into the depot. Not much else to it. It has these two loading platforms with slightly elevated tracks, obviously going to the same level as the carts, as the railway carts, with the fresh trams on it. I'm using procedural objects in here to convert some of the vehicles into more editable props, so I can just angle them slightly like this in here on the slope. The slope is probably a bit too much, but it's probably fine for these kinds of detailing purposes. So maybe the nearby factories in Altengrad are also going to be producing trams in this time period. I don't know. But even if they weren't, I'm thinking that the new vehicles would probably be transported into the city like this. So there would have to be some kind of a place to unload it. So why not do it exactly at the depot and exactly like this? In Altengrad in this time period, I think the trams already do share the same gauge as the railway. I was trying to find some historical references to this, and apparently in some parts of the Czech Republic at least, the trams already did have the 1435 gauge, and some other cities as well. Obviously a lot of different cities didn't use the standard gauge, so theoretically it might have been possible to actually push the cars, the trams on the normal railways, I guess. Maybe just hook them up after an engine or something. I don't know. I've never seen any pictures. Maybe you guys can shed some light on this in the comments. But nevertheless, I decided to build this little unloading platform because it just felt like a nice detail to just fill the space. Anyway, as you can see here, I'm using a lot of these tracks around the depot to kind of make it larger, not just use it as the finished building, but also do some detailing around it. So not just the loading depot, but the platform, but also some of these other connections into these different parts of the buildings. It's very common actually you can see it in many depots around the world where you have these loops around the main warehouses, the main buildings. I guess it's much better for sorting the cars and stuff like that. So did something like that, and a couple of little workshops here and there where the tracks also lead. So that might be some kind of repair stations or something. It doesn't really matter. It's just a nice detail and makes the depot area, depot complex much bigger. So one thing that I decided to do right from the start in here was to put all these wires in here, and this was a very difficult task at first because I decided that I want to have this intersection highly customized, and as you can see, it's not exactly all that easy with the tracks, especially right now. It's basically right now it's like a 5-way intersection, but later I'm going to make that loop go so that it can only be accessed from inside of the city. Maybe it's not going to be exactly all that realistic, whatever, but maybe practical as well. Who knows? But the loop is just going to be acting as the passenger station, not really connected to the depot itself. So it makes sense to get rid of some of the connections. And also the loop is not going to be accessed or accessible when you are going from that main road, from that future industrial zone. It just simplifies all the connections on the intersection, and it just makes it look much cleaner. But I guess I'm going to do that later in the time lapse, the final connections. Anyway, in here we also need to think about finishing some of these blocks. So eventually I decided that the tram depot is basically going to be inside of this block of buildings. Well, the buildings are going to be basically on one side. On the other side there is that somewhat natural border made by those tracks and the what is that called, the wall, the earth wall. I just can't remember the word here. Anyway, you probably know what I mean. Basically, the railway is just one border of this entire complex, entire area, right? Embankment, that's the word that I was looking for, embankment. Anyway, so as you can see, this actually is a bit sunken. This area with the backyard of the depot is a bit sunken compared to the rest of the terrain, which is just good. Like, I really want to have these kinds of details, these kinds of vertical details in the city, in Altengrad, especially in these modern areas, because it just makes it look much better. And it's, again, just a nice opportunity, as always, to use some new stuff. So, for example, in here, that railway depot retaining walls that I downloaded just recently for the Altengrad save. Even doing the retaining walls on the sides of the buildings, and it's just going to make it look much more interesting. Yeah, definitely. But also, it's going to emphasize that maybe the depot was not exactly part of this area. It was not planned to be here at first, and the buildings might be slightly older. So maybe there were some different blocks of buildings that got demolished, maybe, or something. Maybe it was just empty. It doesn't really matter. But the retaining walls definitely make it seem like there was definitely some change to the overall landscaping. Doing some of these details with the entrances to the depot, as you can see, I used a lot of different tracks, these tramway, these inserts made by Pevex, and they served as the tracks around the depot in the depot area, but also as these kinds of transitions into the entrance, because obviously the entrance into the depot is just a regular road, which means that it has the sidewalks and the actual road is slightly below the surface. So I had to level that into just one level. So that was a very easy thing to do with those inserts. Doing these tiered backyards in here, I finally decided to slightly rework the retaining walls in here to better reflect that, but I was not really doing this detailing all that much. I really just wanted to place a couple of decals in here and then hide the rest of the features that were not detailed with trees and some bushes. Also, I had to do, you could have seen, I already did it at the start, I had to do that intersection between the main road and also the railway. And that's obviously something that you cannot do in the game. The game is just going to tell you that these roads cannot intersect. So in the game, I had to do it by just overlapping them. But obviously, the railway would then go into the sidewalks, which just disappear into the sidewalks. So this is a technique that I think I was also using in the next episode of Altengrad, and basically making it so that there is an intersection, like a fake intersection, with some kind of narrow roads going underneath the railway. And then those roads are slightly going to be sunken so that the railway can just continue onward. And I can either detail some of the edges or just leave it as it is. It's not exactly looking all that bad either. So that was pretty nice to do. Also had to do all of these pillars everywhere. This is actually something that I completely forgot about. So had to put a lot of these cable holders all around the depot area. And the good thing is that these tramway inserts are already having the cables on top of them. So I didn't really need to bother with that too much, or well, actually at all, because that would have been really painful to do otherwise. Overlapping these kinds of networks, that's never all that easy to do. I'm not sure if I'm going to ever show that in the time lapse. I'm kind of waiting for that with the commentary. Oh yeah, this is still the intersection without the changes. For this episode, I had to download a mod that's called Remove Unconnected Tracks, I think. It's basically a mod that allows you to get rid of the models of the tracks if they are not connected by the Traffic Manager lane connector. Okay, I guess I'm not going to show you that in the time-lapse just yet, but I can talk about it anyway. So it's a very useful feature because sometimes you are going to create very sharp turns with the trams, and it's not necessarily some kind of connection that you would want to use in the city anyway, but the tracks are just looking bad. So you can just disconnect that with the Traffic Manager, or rather do the lane connectors where you want the trams to go, and the rest of the connections are just going to disappear. So that's very, very good. I think I was using that in Aurelia at some point, but I'm not exactly sure now if that had actually stayed or not. Maybe I just experimented with that. But in Altengrad is definitely something very, very useful. Back in the old days when we didn't have the node controller, I had to do that by basically creating my own roads in the road editor and then setting the maximum angle of connection or something like that, which basically meant that that the tracks would not connect if the corner was too sharp. I was using that, for example, if you remember, with that little square in front of the church near the downtown where the two tram tracks meet. Then there's also that one turn that's just not allowed because the tracks are disconnected with that intersection. I'm not sure if you remember that. It's kind of old. Yes, finally, this is it. So this is where I downloaded the remove unconnected tracks, and this is the finished result of the intersection. So now you can see better how I thought it's going to work. Maybe it's not exactly the most practical loop ever, but it serves nice as the terminus station for the trams going from the downtown. And it probably even makes sense because there are actually going to be a lot of residential buildings around this area. Well, there already are. So the trams might be just going through the city into this place, and some different line is just going to continue past this point into that industrial zone that I'm going to build in the next episode, okay? And, as always with all these kinds of projects, I'm just trying to build things so that they just look good, they look nice. And this loop definitely felt like something I really wanted to build here. I used the surface painter to get rid of the pavement underneath the tracks and make them kind of blend together with the nature in this area, and only do the paved surfaces where there would be the tram stops. So it's a very, very simple loop, only intended for one line and not really intended for some like manipulation with the cars or just parking or something. It's just intended to just quickly turn around and go on its way, right? If obviously the trams want to just stick around in this area, then they need to go into the depot. This is definitely going to be the edge, and it already is the edge of the high density areas, the high density blocks. So in this area, I placed only a couple of lines of buildings here and there. I also made sure that some of those lines of buildings are not exactly aligned with this main street to kind of make it look like this street is new, and that's why it's not following the old layout of the buildings, right? So it's definitely following the layout of the tram depot, well, kind of, but it's not really following these older structures. And there are these empty spaces between the road and the buildings. There are lots of these open green areas, and there are going to be lots of trees as well. So this is definitely going to look like a very good edge to the already built areas. This particular building that I'm placing in here is a large residential building, also something that easily looks like 1930s, even though this particular building is like from Moscow, I think, from 40s or something like that. It doesn't really matter. The style looks pretty much exactly what I wanted to do here. And again, doing these detailings in front of that and having that building kind of lonely, not really going to connect it to any block or anything, because it just looks very good by itself. And it's probably going to be some workers' housing or something. So that might be the reason why there is that loop, why there might be the tram station just, for some line that's going to end here. Well, not really because of this one building, but because of this entire area, right? Doing lots of these details, I really didn't want to bother too much with this detailing because the building is the main focus point of this area anyway. So just cover lots of these places with trees, and that's just going to look much, much better. And also decals underneath the trees here and there, so that the entire area is just not covered with these flowers and bushes. There are going to be some decals. Also, I had to do this because on the side of the Tram Depot building there's that graffiti, which is not going to look exactly good in the 1930s in Altengrad. And also the Tram Depot is supposed to be kind of new, so I didn't really want to make it all that dirty, even though I did put some stain decals here and there. I'm also doing the expansion of some of these blocks, but I'm going to cut it very, very short because this is something that we have seen many times before, and it's not all that really important. I didn't finish all the gaps between the Tram Depot and the hospital episode. So there are still some gaps that I'm gradually going to finish with some unrelevant, no, what's the word? With some other episodes that are not exactly going to be relevant to this expansion, right? So, in some coming episodes, we are just going to see these blocks gradually finished, even though I might be working somewhere else in the city, because I don't really want to show this in the time-lapse too much, but it's just places that I don't really have any other plans for, right? And they are kind of in the middle of some different projects, so it wouldn't even make sense. But like I explained in the previous episode, doing this kinds of expansion just adds to the overall high density feel of the city, to the feel that the city is actually quite big, right? So these blocks right here are definitely going to feel much less dense because they have these disconnected buildings and some lower structures. Anyway, this is the transition between before and after, what we have after today's episode. As you can see, there are the gaps that I've been talking about. Anyway, big chunk of the city finished. The Tram Depot is quite large, actually, as you can see. And I like it. It's looking really, really good in this area. I like how this entrance is kind of open. There are these gaps in the city blocks. There are no buildings, just in a line like this. I know that in the real life scenario in Dresden, the city around the depot actually looks very orderly. Like there are these 90-degree blocks and the streets are kind of going straight. So it's definitely not looking like in real life, but why not build it like this in the game? So this is just a cinematic of the inside of the depot. It's looking really good. It's looking really good. I like how it turned out. It might see some changes in the future, definitely with the vehicles, obviously. But maybe even with the layout, maybe some buildings are going to be changed as well. And, it's just all going to see some changes. But it's definitely going to serve all the way to modern times because it is a very modern structure. It's placed kind of strategically, I'd say, in the city. So it's definitely going to serve the city for the coming decades. These are the trams that are going into the loop. Can you see that? Yeah, they have these. They have two stations on the loop, by the way. There's that first station for unloading people. Obviously, you can't really make them go off the tram, and then there is that station on the opposite side of the loop where people are supposed to hop on, right? And then the trams are just going to go back into the city. Right now, there's just this one line that goes up in there. I think later I'm probably going to just reorganize it slightly and do some kind of different lines so that it would make more sense in regards to the rest of the city. Anyway, guys, that is going to be all for this episode of Altengrad. Like I said, in the next episode, we are going to do some very big industrial expansion of the city, which is going to be located here. So it's going to be on the opposite side from that cargo harbor. So the city is finally going to have two different industrial zones. This one is going to be much more modern, and I can already tell you that it's definitely something to look forward to because it's going to look really, really good. All right, so that's going to be all for today. Thank you for watching, guys. Like I said, stay tuned for next video. If you like this one, then you can always put a thumbs up underneath it. You can share the video with your friends and subscribe to the channel if you're new here. And if you want to directly support the channel, you can become a channel member through the join button below. Thanks again. I'll see you next time. Take care. Goodbye.